Hi guys. We're gonna keep trying this. Hopefully my Wi-Fi is working now. So thanks for tuning in and bear with me. Just kind of what happens when you rely on technology. It always seems to stop working. So thank you all for being here and joining in. See a few familiar faces. Hi Kristen. We'll get started here pretty quickly. I know we're running a few minutes late already. So thanks for joining. We're going to talk fueling for every distance. And I have a special guest who will be joining me today. So thank you again for tuning in, and hopefully this will go smoothly. Hi, Heather. Lots of people joining in. I am over on the West Coast in California, and it's still a little bit light here. So I know probably a lot of you are joining. It's your evening. So thanks for making the time after probably a busy day. It's kind of crazy how dark it's getting so early right now. It's kind of not my favorite, but what can you do? All right, we're going to go ahead and get started here because we're running a little late, thanks to my Wi-Fi. So like I said, the topic for this talk is going to be sports nutrition, and really specifically how to fuel for your optimal run performance. I am Stephanie Howe, and I am a Cliff Bar athlete. I've been a runner for most of my life, but really been running trails and ultras for the last decade. I also run for the North Face and a few other trail ultra sponsors, and feel very fortunate to have the chance to share my knowledge with you tonight. I also have a PhD in sports nutrition, and so I kind of come at it from both the athlete angle and the academia angle. And so we're really just going to talk today about specifics in sports nutrition and really stick to what we know based on the science and answer your questions, because I saw the list of questions and you guys submitted really awesome questions. So we'll try to get to as many as we can. But first of all, before we get started here, I'm hoping my guest jumps in here soon. Just give him a couple minutes to connect in. So Daniel, are you around? Hopefully he jumps in pretty soon. So Daniel is a fellow Cliff Bar athlete, and we've had the privilege to connect a few times now, just over email and over Zoom to get to know each other. But he's got some pretty incredible accomplishments. So he is the 2019 world champion, the men's wheelchair 800 meter and the marathon distances. He's also the world record holder in the 800 meter and the 5,000 meter. And at 20 years old, he became the youngest person ever to win a major marathon Grand Slam. So that means he won London, Chicago, New York, and the Boston Marathon in 2019. So some pretty incredible accomplishments. I mean, to have that list of credentials at the age of 20 is pretty impressive. So I'm really excited to welcome Daniel along with me today. And he's going to be asking me some questions, and I'm going to be answering them. So we'll just give him a moment to jump in. All right, well, I'm still waiting for him, so I may get started and just jump right into the questions. So, like I said, over the last week, we've been asking you to submit your sports nutrition questions for us. And really specific to now, because a lot of you are preparing for the Finish Strong Challenge. And so I'm going to do my best to sum up the science as it relates to those questions. And I'll talk about some of my practical experience along the way as well. And just one disclaimer I want to throw out before we dive into it too much. The ideas and suggestions I give come from myself as an athlete and a sports nutrition professional, but you should always seek a medical care provider to give you specific clinical or nutrition advice. So take this as suggestions, but always make sure to check in with your doctor and make sure these are appropriate for you, especially if you have any sort of underlying medical condition. All right. So, one of the biggest questions, one of the most frequent questions is, when and what should I eat before I run, and how does this change for a 5K versus a half marathon? And then also, is there any difference between training and race day? So I'm going to start with the end of this question with the difference between training and race day. It should absolutely be the same, because you can use every training run, especially your long runs, as a practice for your races. And so you shouldn't be eating, pancakes and bacon before your training runs and then try to go into your race day and have something totally different. Use each long run or each, say, weekend run, endurance run, as an opportunity to practice your pre-run nutrition strategy, because that way you get into the race and you've done it 100 times or 10 times at least. You wake up in the morning, you have your breakfast, and then you go run. So it shouldn't really be different between race day and a training day. And then the changes, actually, let's talk about what you should eat first. So primarily what the body is going to be using during a 5K to half marathon distance is carbohydrate. And our bodies use all three nutrients, but carbohydrate is the most prominent food or fuel used for endurance exercise. And especially as intensity increases, carbohydrate is going to be what our body uses to complete the run. And so you want your breakfast to be something that contains carbohydrate with a little bit of fat and protein. And ideally, it's going to be a more simple carbohydrate so your body can digest it and use it right away. You don't want to eat something really complex because it might sit in your stomach and cause GI distress, or it might take a long time to break down and then not be useful. And so that's really not appropriate for right before a training run or for race day. So some things that I like to recommend are like a banana with peanut butter for, a shorter run, like maybe a 5K, oatmeal with a little bit of like chia seeds in there, or I like to put an egg in my oatmeal or some nut butter, a piece of toast with avocado. A Cliff Bar is a great mix of carbohydrate, fat, and a little bit of protein. The important thing is to have something that's familiar to you. So even though I said, I like to have oatmeal with an egg, that might not sit well for you. So trying what you think, your pre-race breakfast should be in training is a really good way to dial it in. In terms of the amount between a 5K and a half marathon, it doesn't have to be that much different. In a 5K, obviously it's much shorter, but in a half marathon, you're going to be expending a lot more energy, but you're going to refuel along the way. So you don't really want to take in too much because it's just going to sit in your stomach and be sloshy. And so what you take in the night before is pretty important. And then the morning of should just be your simple breakfast of about, say, 300 to 500 calories, depending on how you feel with that much volume of food in your stomach and depending on who you are as an individual. Okay, so that's kind of pre-race. And like I said, starting to practice during your training runs is a really good idea. And if you guys have any questions that you just think of, you can ask them in the comments, and I'll try to get to them as much as I can. So our second question is, at what length of run do I need to start eating while I run? And how much should I consume while I'm running? So again, this, you know, we know black and white from the research, but when we apply it, there's a little bit of gray. So I'm going to give you kind of the ballpark recommendations for this. And it does vary on body size, on fitness, on gender, on a lot of different demographics. So know that there is a little wiggle room with these recommendations. So generally speaking, we have enough carbohydrate stores, which are stored as glycogen in our muscles, to fuel an activity that's 45 to 60 minutes. And so a 5K, you're probably going to be able to get through without having to take in any additional energy. And so when you start running or racing kind of at that hour break point, that's when you want to start thinking about adding in some fuel, because it's going to help your muscles to stay energized during the race. And so for a 5K, my strategy and my recommendation is to wake up in the morning, have your pre-race breakfast, and then if you need a little pick-me-up right before the start, you can have a couple blocks or a gel, but then you can get through the race without having to fuel. Same-ish for a 10K. Most people are running it, you know, close to that hour or under barrier. You can take in something near the end. It should be something simple though, like a couple blocks or a gel or some sports drink. But for the most part, a 10K can follow the same recommendations as a 5K. Now, when we get to the half marathon, a lot of times for most of us who aren't, you know, Kipchoge, we're going to be running for a little bit longer than an hour. And so you do benefit from taking in fuel in those longer distances. And so you want to still do the same protocol where you wake up, you have your pre-race breakfast, and then as you start the race, you want to start fueling before you get to that hour barrier. And the reason for that is if you wait too long, your energy levels, they start to dip. And so we want to prevent that. We want to keep your blood glucose stable so that your working muscles can keep going at that same intensity. So I recommend taking a gel or a couple blocks at around 30 to 40 minutes, and then just staying on a consistent schedule. And so you can get your body tuned to this by putting a timer on your watch every 20 to 30 minutes to beep and let you know where you are. And practice this as well during training, because that will also help you to help adapt get your gut adapted to taking in fuel. And so I think we'll probably get to this in a little more detail, but ideally you're looking for around 200 calories per hour, and that's about 30 to 60 grams of carbohydrate. So we're talking like 2 gels per hour. Or half a sleeve of block. So it's not a lot, but you have to train your body to be able to absorb that glucose. Let's see. Oh, another question that we had kind of along those same lines is, what if I want to fuel with real food? And right now there's a trend in the sports nutrition world for athletes to be asking about real food, because we hear a lot in the media about having real food. Like, we don't want to have sugar, we don't want to have processed foods. And that is completely true when we're sitting down to eat a meal. We want to have very complex foods and you know, things that aren't processed, because they have more nutrients for our body. They're going to take a while to break down, and they're going to provide more than just energy. But when we're running, we actually don't really want as much of that, because the goal of fueling is to just get energy in the body as quick as possible to the working muscles. We don't want to have to digest it and break it down, because then it's going to be really slow to get into the body, and that can sit in the stomach and cause some sloshing or some stomach issues, and also just doesn't provide the energy that's necessary to continue fueling the activity. And so, although real food sounds like an attractive option, it's not always the best to use during race day. Some and again, there's some gray area for this. Some options for real food, if gels and blocks are not something that you can stomach, and uh, I will beg to differ that most of you can stomach them. You just have to practice with them. But some options are really simple carbohydrates, such as potatoes, rice, and bananas. They can provide some pretty simple carbohydrates when you're running. The thing to be aware of with some of the real food is that it can have fiber in it. And fiber isn't something we really want to have to process or digest during a race, because it can just lead to some GI issues or stomach issues. So if you do go the real food route, try to stick to really simple options. I myself tend to do mostly like gels and blocks and bars. And then every once in a while in a longer race, I do really long races, so I'm out there for hours, I'll throw in like a potato or some potato chips to get something a little bit salty. So that's kind of a way you can mix it up a little bit. But I think just be really, pay attention to what you're eating and make sure there's not a lot of fiber in it or it's not hard to break down, and always practice it during training. Okay, next question. So, what is the best post-run food, and do I need to eat a recovery food after every run of any length? Okay, so post-run fueling, this is a really important topic that we tend to kind of glaze over. Like, we think about what should we eat before, what should we eat during, but then we forget about like after. Finish, it's like, yay, I'm done. And what to eat after can actually really help with recovery and help you to get the most out of your training. And so it's a really good idea to refuel post-run, especially if it's a long run or an interval session, hill session, tempo run. Because you're going to be expending a lot of energy. There's some muscle damage that happens. And by taking in fuel right after each of these training sessions, you're going to help your body recover faster. And so the next session that you go out, you're able to push a little bit harder because you're better recovered. So what you actually want is some protein, about 20 grams of high quality protein, and some carbohydrate. And there's two reasons to have those nutrients. One, the protein is going to help repair any muscle damage. So we damage our muscles every time we go out and run and train, and that's how they get stronger. They have to build back up. And so the protein really helps repair the muscles and help them to build up. And we need a complete protein, which means a protein that has all the amino acids in it. And amino acids, I like to think of them as Legos. Like, you're building a protein using all these different Legos, and a complete protein has all of the different Legos you need to build up a muscle or a protein. And so making sure that you're getting a good quality protein is important. And you need about 20 grams. So it's not a ton. We always think we need a protein load, but about 20 grams of protein. And it can come from a plant-based protein. A good example of that is the Cliff Builders bars. They have about 20 grams of protein. They're designed for post-workout. And then they also have a little bit of carbohydrate. And the carbohydrate is important because that's what's going to help replenish the glucose that you used in your muscles. And like I said, you have glucose stored as glycogen in your muscles, but you use it up as you're running. And so as you run and train, you finish, you're more or less depleted, and then you need to build it back up. And so by taking in the carbohydrate, that's how you replenish the glycogen stores. Now, the key with post-run nutrition is to get it in pretty quickly after the run. So I know this is tricky because you finish a run and you're not hungry. And that makes sense. We know from the science, I actually did my dissertation on this, that after you do a run, and especially a high intensity run, you're not really able to refuel because your appetite is suppressed. But to get the most out of your post-race fueling, you need to take something in after about 20 to 30 minutes. And so that's why I think sports food is a really great option, because you finish your run, it's going to be really hard to make a meal really quick and have it get into your body within the first 20 minutes. So I like to have the Clif recovery drink, protein drink that has whey protein in it. It's my favorite. It tastes like hot chocolate, or the Builder's Bar. Other options are like a piece of fruit with some nut butter, full fat yogurt with some fruit, or even a latte. That the milk in a latte is really a good recovery option. So it doesn't have to be the perfect food. Getting something in is better than nothing, but that's something that you should start implementing in your training runs because it's really helpful for recovery. And I guess the breaking point kind of like, okay, so when do I need to do this? Anything over like I would say 40 to 60 minute run is when fueling becomes exponentially important. Sometimes after like a 30-minute run, you probably don't need to fuel because refuel is it's not as important. You still can, but it's not as important because you didn't really deplete your glycogen stores. But anything over an hour, or if it's a high intensity workout, so say it was like 30 minutes, but you did high intensity intervals, that's a session that you definitely want to refuel and try to recover from. So getting something in right away is important. And for those of you just joining us right now, I see a lot of new faces jumping in. I'm Stephanie Howe, a Clif Bar athlete and nutrition expert, and I'm here just talking about how to properly fuel for any distance, and especially talking about the Finish Strong Challenge, 5K, 10K, half marathon as part of the Boston Marathon series. And we're answering your nutrition questions and talking about how to fuel for these events. So our next question, this is a common one that I get kind of amongst all athletes, is tracking my macronutrients essential for performance? And let me see, I think we've got maybe Daniel trying to get on here. So yes and no. So I think a lot of times we get hung up on trying to be really rigid and controlling about our nutrition. And to some extent, yeah, we need to pay attention to what we put in our bodies, but I think it's more important to pay attention to food and what we need rather than count macros, because that can really just lead to us being overly obsessive, and it's not always a black and white situation like we think it is. So what I suggest is, rather than try to count your calories or grams every day, is to learn a little bit about what you need. And as an endurance runner, endurance athlete, it's not that different from just a healthy, active individual. With the exception of you need a little bit more energy or calories every day because of the higher turnover. So starting with carbohydrates, we want about half of our energy to come from carbohydrates. So that's about 50 to 65% of our total daily energy intake. For those of you who really want to calculate it out and get an idea, that's somewhere between 5 to 10 grams of carbohydrate per kilogram of body weight. And that's each day. And we need that much carbohydrate because of what I said earlier. It's the primary source of fuel for our bodies. We are using fat as well, but we are also using carbohydrate. And the faster, the shorter the event, the more carbohydrate we're using. So what does that look like? Because I don't want you guys counting your grams every day. So normally I like to think of, okay, I'm going to build a plate. So let's talk about what are carbohydrates. And a lot of times people are super confused over what a carbohydrate is. And it's actually any type of fruit, vegetable, or whole grain. It's not just bread, it's not just potatoes or pasta. Fruits and vegetables are really great sources of carbohydrate. And so they kind of vary in their density. So fruits and vegetables are lower energy dense sources, whereas things like, pasta and potatoes and some grains have a little more energy in them. So I think it's good to include a combination of both. And the reason for that is you want to get a lot of the micronutrients, the vitamins, the minerals, the antioxidants that are going to come from those fruits and vegetables. But then you want to get some of the nutrients and the energy that are in those grains as well. So my recommendation for your plate or your bowl is to fill the bottom with a bunch of vegetables. And that can be a couple of handfuls of dark leafy greens. It can be some roasted sweet potatoes, Brussels sprouts. Right now is fall, so I'm thinking all the beets, parsnips, potatoes, squash. What else is in season right now? I just went to the grocery store, so I should know this. But, you know, a lot of roasted vegetables are a great thing to put on top of the dark leafy greens because they're a little bit more digestible. On top of that, you want to put some sort of grain or more simple carbohydrate, if you will. And that's because you want some of that fiber and low energy carbohydrates, but you also want something that's got a little sustenance. So adding like a half a cup of cooked rice, a tortilla, a slice of bread, some pasta. That's going to be a really good balance of the two. Okay, so that's your carbohydrates. Now, the next macronutrient is protein. And protein needs for endurance athletes are a little bit higher than they are for just the average individual. And that's because you have more turnover in your muscles. So I said earlier that you're going to have some breakdown happening and you need to replenish and recover. That cycle just means you need a little more protein. And so the amount is about 1.2 to 1.4 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. And the percentage breaks down to about 10 to 30%. I know that's a huge range. Most endurance athletes don't want to go below 20. 20 to 30%, I think, is a nice sweet spot. But again, instead of thinking of those numbers, think about your nice little plate that you have. And then on top of those vegetables and grains, we're going to put some protein. So a mix of proteins is the best way to get everything that you need. Lean animal proteins are great, like chicken, turkey, salmon, or any cold water fish, eggs, some dairy has some good protein in it. You can also get a lot of plant-based proteins, keeping in mind that they don't have all of those essential amino acids, not all the Legos. So you need to mix and match. But things like lentils, legumes, all kinds of beans, nuts and seeds, some grains even have some good proteins in them. So a mix, I think, is a good idea. And, you know, if you're thinking about amounts, that really varies depending on the individual, but most people take in more protein than they need. So think quality over quantity. A good rule of thumb, and this is a very, very rough estimate, is for like a piece of animal protein is about the size, the palm of your hand. So that's about 3 to 4 ounces. A couple eggs, half a cup of beans or legumes. That's going to be enough protein generally for most people at each meal, keeping in mind that you need to get protein at each meal throughout the day. Okay, so we've got our vegetables, we've got our grain, our protein, and then the last macronutrient is fat. And fat is a little more dense than the other two nutrients, so it's harder to conceptualize. So the way to use fat is to just put it on your food because fat makes everything taste better. And it helps you to absorb a lot of the micronutrients. So many of the vitamins can't be absorbed without fat. So that you're doing yourself a favor by adding it to the top of your plate. And there's 2 types of fats. There's unsaturated and then there's saturated fat. And we want some of both, but we want to prioritize unsaturated fats, which tend to be plant-based options and things like olive oils, peanut butter, nuts and seeds, avocados. All of those things are really good to add to the top of your bowl. And then some saturated fat is good. So some feta cheese, dairy is a saturated fat, coconut oil is a saturated fat. Just kind of add it to make the flavor come out rather than try to think of an amount, because it's you kind of need to use it more sparingly than the other 2 nutrients. So I know that was kind of a lot, but that's how I recommend thinking of what you need rather than counting your macros. Okay, we've got a couple more questions here. How do you prevent a sloshing stomach? Okay, so this is a really big one. And I personally have had some problems with fueling and sloshy stomach in some of my longer races. So it usually goes back to, oh, we've got Daniel here. You're sideways, but there you are.
Okay.
Yeah, there you go. I'm just talking about sloshy stomach right now. So
All right.
yeah, have you ever had sloshy stomach in a race?
Who knew 3 buttons were so hard to push?
Um, anyways, most of the sloshing comes from poor fueling practices. So usually from a fuel that isn't simple enough, and it's going to sit in your stomach and just kind of cause that sloshy, upset, nauseated feeling. So that can be from something too complex, or it can be from something with a lot of fiber, or it can be simply from not fueling enough. If you wait too long, sometimes then when you add something into your stomach, it just doesn't sit well. So the best way to combat that is to, one, use foods that are appropriate for the distance and the intensity that you're doing, and two, make sure that you're getting in enough energy and start early. So within that first hour, and really sticking to a schedule. That really helps your body get adapted. And the gut, the stomach, is just like the muscles. It can be adapted to training. So properly training it in your runs when you go out and practicing your fueling is really going to help your body to adapt. You're going to adapt so that when you get to race day, you don't have that sloshiness. So Daniel, we're on number 6. If you want to take over,
Yep.
and you can ask me the questions now.
Yeah, I know I certainly have to watch how much I eat before I go into a race because I have to fit in my chair. And so our next question here is, what is the most common nutrition mistake that runners make in training?
Yeah, so I kind of alluded to this earlier. Usually the most common thing that runners forget to do during training runs is fuel. And because, it's like, oh, yeah, I can get through a 90-minute run without taking in anything. Just because you can do it doesn't mean you should do it. So each long run or endurance run is a chance to practice your pre-race fueling strategy. And so, like I said, you want to take fuel with you, practice taking it at the intervals that you would race day so that your body knows how to handle it. And then kind of along with that, the other training mistake, and I've been guilty of this, is fueling with foods other than what you plan to race with. So at some point you get super comfortable with like taking in gels and blocks, and it's like, today I'm going to take these cookies with me, or this piece of pizza. I have done both of those. And yeah, although you can get that down during training and it tastes good, that doesn't really help your body prepare for race day. And so practicing with the fuel you plan to use, especially as you get closer to race day, is super important. So save the cookies and the pizza for after the event or after your training run. They'll taste better anyways.
Yeah, I know. Right before one of my marathons, I had seen some guidelines for I should have this many carbs the days leading up to a race, and I tried to put in that many carbs in a day, and that was a bad idea.
Yeah, yeah, it's tough sometimes. And just for those who are maybe just joining us, and Daniel, since you just jumped on, I just want to give you a quick introduction. Daniel Romanchuk, as I said earlier, you weren't on the call yet, but we kind of went over your impressive resume of the 2019 world champion in the men's wheelchair 800 meter and marathon distances. Also the world record holder in the 800 meter and 5,000 meter. And then at just 20 years old, you were the youngest person to ever win the marathon Grand Slam, or the major marathon Grand Slam, which includes London, Chicago, New York, and the Boston Marathon. So pretty incredible accomplishment. So we're honored to have your insight and have you here today.
Oh, you're the nutrition experts. And so our next question here is about hydration. I remember when I started to go out on longer runs, I maybe would take, a water at most, if anything. And so I struggle to stay hydrated. I'm a salty sweater. How do people stay hydrated on longer runs without having to carry a bottle?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So first of all, there isn't a great way to stay hydrated without taking in fluids. So I would say, you can't like become like a camel and store fluids in your body. And so figuring out a strategy of how to get in fluids when you're running is really important. I recommend trying a handheld because you can get used to them and they're really not that cumbersome to hold. You can use them in training and actually in a race too. I've done several races from actually you guys can laugh, but I've done a 5K carrying a handheld all the way up to 100-mile race. And the nice thing with a handheld is the weight isn't enough that it's going to slow you down, but it can help add back time, because if you need to stop and grab a water, like a cup of water from an aid station, that can take some time to grab like 1 or 2 cups, try to sip it, and then keep on running. I've run the Boston Marathon and I carried a handheld, and when people were going to the sides and trying to grab their cups, I ran right down the middle and just didn't lose any time. And so I think trying a handheld is a really good way to get the hydration you need, and then you can take it in whenever you want. You don't have to wait until a certain mile. Another strategy, if you really don't want to go that way, when you're out training, just plan your route around places that have water stops. So I've also done this, knowing where all the water fountains are in my local running route, or planning a loop that runs by my house a few times so that I can stash a bottle and then hydrate, because there really isn't another way to stay hydrated besides just taking in water at regular intervals. So that would be my answer to that one. We kind of covered a lot of, I talked a lot at you guys. Does anyone have like any more specific questions about training or racing, fueling or hydration? You can just go ahead and type those into the comments. Or Daniel, do you have any questions or things you want to add?
I mean that was a lot. No, I think some great guidance there.
We're getting some suggestions here. Plant water in the bushes along your route. I've done that before too. That's a great way to stash bottles and hydrate, as long as no one's going to tamper with it. Like I said, with these nutrition recommendations, we have really good science on how fueling works. And the tricky thing is when you take the science out into the field and you apply it, you kind of have to be aware that there's some gray area. And so trying out these strategies and finding out the right kind of, I guess, what's the word I'm looking for? The right concoction or the right combination of fuel for you is the best way to figure out what's going to work. So use these recommendations as a guideline, and then go out and try and practice and take notes. That's the best way to learn about what you like and what works best for your body. And do it in different temperatures too. For example, I know in hot temperatures, I really like the salted watermelon blocks and the citrus gels. But in cold temperatures, I prefer having like the mocha gels, or even like half of a Cliff Bar when I'm running, because it's a lot easier to get things down. And so find out those differences, those preferences that you have, because they're going to make it, they're going to help you when you get into race day, just have confidence in your fueling plan and take away all of the anxiety associated with it, because you'll know what to do because you've done it before.
Yep. And a lot about the sport is just trying things and figure out what works best for you.
Absolutely.
I think I saw one thing come through, and that is it possible to train on a low carb diet?
So yeah, there were a few questions on that. That's more of a specific question in terms of like an individual. Carbohydrates are super important for endurance performance. And so, yeah, I mean, it is possible, but are you going to set yourself up for optimal performance? No. And I say that with like a little asterisk because sometimes people do feel good physically on low carbohydrate diets, but it's because one, they're eating better and they're losing weight. But actually, if they would add carbohydrate and still eat better, they would run faster or better as well. So that one's a little bit tricky, but I'm going to say that low carbohydrate is not beneficial to any sort of performance advantage. And I just did a great podcast on this topic, reviewing some of the literature with Jason Koop, who is an amazing ultra running coach. And his podcast is called Koopcast. And we kind of broke down the low carbohydrate, high fat literature. So that would be a great place to start for anyone just looking to learn what the science actually says.
It sounds interesting.
Yeah, there's a lot with nutrition. We could talk for the next 2 hours, but I know a lot of you, it's getting to be late in the evening. So thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for the great questions, you guys. Like these weren't just like, you know, your basic questions. These like really got into the meat, pun intended, of the issue, and I hope it was helpful for you. And if you do have more questions, you can find me on my website is stephaniemurrayhowe.com. You can email me through there. Check out some resources that cliffbar.com has, because they have wonderful science behind their product development and some really good blogs that you can read. And to kind of wrap things up, I just want to mention that Cliff Bar is giving a special 20% off for I guess going through December for anyone who goes to their website and wants to stock up on some nutrition products. And right now is a great time because they have some of those holiday flavors, which are, you know, they're only available for a few months of the year. So stock up on any of those goodies to help you fuel and train for your Finish Strong challenge. And really, thank you, Daniel. I know we had some Wi-Fi problems on both of our ends today, but thank you so much for being here. And you're really an inspiration to this entire community to have, you know, the accomplishments that you've had at such a young age is really incredible. So thank you for inspiring us and for being here tonight.
Oh, thanks, Steph, and thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, Cliff Bar, and thank you, Boston Marathon, for hosting. And yeah, we'll do it again soon. Thanks, guys. Have a good night.